Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis. And I got to say, I'm real excited to be back again this season. We took off for the summer and we're starting a new series of shows. Over the summer, I got to reflect a little bit about our show. We really want to engage you, our audience, in the discussion and the conversations with our guests. One of the ways we want to do that is through Facebook. We have a Facebook page which is called Community Conversations. So if you're on Facebook, you just fill that in and it'll take you there. Your questions, your comments, your thoughts, either before or after the shows, are always welcome. And with that, I'd like to welcome my guest, Hadju.
Hello, Steve.
I'm so bad at pronouncing your name. I know I've done it probably 4 different times or different ways. And
that was perfect.
Patty is the executive director at Shelterhouse here in Thunder Bay. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Patty, I want to start a little bit about you. I know you're known as the ED or whatever it is, CEO, the boss over at Shelterhouse. Mm-hmm. How did you end up there? What's been your journey that attracted you? What were you doing before Shelterhouse and in the earlier days?
Well, I call myself a bit of a Heinz 57. I have a degree from Lakehead in anthropology. And I'm just completing my Master's of Public Administration with University of Victoria. So I've been a lifelong learner myself. I had some challenges when I was young as well. So there was a time where I guess it would have been considered quote unquote homeless. I did some couch surfing and that kind of thing. So, really had quite a kind of a long path towards education, I guess. And anyways, long story short, I ended up in public health after finishing my education. I was really fortunate to acquire a job in public health as a planner. And my particular portfolio was alcohol and substance use. And through that work, learned a lot about what we call the social determinants of health and public health, but really the foundations of what makes a healthy community. And the work that I did in public health, as I grew in that role and grew in the knowledge, I realized that's the pivotal work that a community needs to do. Because really that's where, long-term health outcomes, you can see those, where we actually have some economic benefit to some of the spending long-term. And really sets the stage for future generations of health. And so that became a passion for me in public health, was talking about the social determinants of health, helping organizations and communities work towards foundation work like that. I was really fortunate to write the grant for the Thunder Bay Drug Strategy. We applied to Health Canada, journey of its own, long story. We're successful in getting money from what became the anti-drug strategy under the Conservative government. And we were able to facilitate a 4-pillar drug strategy despite the absolute refusal of the Conservative government to talk about harm reduction, which was a real asset to our community and a real testament to the passion around the table. It was chaired by Rebecca Johnson, a city councillor, and so working with her and with the community, I learned a lot more about substance use and the intersection of those social determinants of health and substance use. And so when Cal Rankin decided that it was time for him to depart, and he told me that about his departure, he encouraged me to think about actually applying as the executive director. And my first reaction was, ooh, what do I know about running a shelter? Never mind an organization. And but then as I read through the material that Shelterhouse had available in terms of their values and their perspective and their mission, and found out about who was on their board, I realized this could be a really good fit in terms of the kinds of things I've been passionate about in my career and the experience that I have on a personal and professional level. And so I took the plunge. I applied and I was a successful candidate and haven't looked back since.
And how long have you been at Shelterhouse?
It's just over 2 years now. I started August 20th, 2012, and it was a real pivotal time actually to start. The managed alcohol program that we can talk about a little bit later was brand new. It had been up and running since March of 2012, so just done, 6 months or so. But also coincidentally, the rate of stays had shot up. And there were a whole bunch of factors that were playing into this, but the phenomenon of homelessness was increasing exponentially at the same time that I started. So we were facing some significant challenges capacity-wise as an organization.
Well, and of course, homelessness has been in the news recently. But before we get on to that, you talked about the social determinants of health. What were some of the ones that you saw were key in your role as a planner?
Well, I think they're all, it's funny because people will say, well, what's the biggest one? And it's kind of like having that chicken and egg conversation, which comes first. But of course, income is a huge social determinant of health. Like your capacity to earn an income, how much money are you able to gather to support yourself and your family? Education was, is a really key social determinant of health. Housing, you can see how all these start to play together, right? But even some things that we don't necessarily consider as essential to health are actually really essential. Things like inclusion. So feeling like you're part of a community and that you have a place in community. And so those I would call more esoteric conversations are actually foundational. And so sometimes we think, well, the way someone feels about where they fit in society doesn't really have an impact. But in fact, it has a tremendous impact in the wellness of that person, but also that community. And I think, it's really hard for me to sort of say, well, which one comes first, because it really is a chicken and an egg. Things like neighborhood, what kinds of assets do you have in your neighborhood, and how far are you away from any grocery store, and what's the transportation like in the neighborhood that you live, and all of those things play a significant role in the development of people's lives and communities and families.
It's interesting, about 25 years ago, I met Fraser Mustard, who was an academic deep thinker on some of these topics. He had the Centre for Advanced Research down in Southern Ontario. And because my background is work and health and safety and injured workers, he came to us and presented that two of the main ones that he looked at were early childhood development, the 0 to 6 age, but also the dynamics at work. And this was really based on a number of big studies, one in England, the Whitehall, and it really had to do with power and control and expectations. So if you have more power within your workplace to be responsible for what the expectations are for you to accomplish, you're healthier than if you don't have the power to actually meet the expectations in your job. And it fits in a way with what we're talking about in terms of inclusion, and certainly in terms of income, and as our status goes up, we actually have more power in society. We have more control over our everyday lives and our choices, and when you lose that power and control, all kinds of things happen inside. I know myself, just thinking about it, I get all nervous because if you can't even afford to put the food on the table for your kids, emotionally, I'm going to be pretty upset about all that.
And that's one of the things that we see when we're working with people that are, really destitute, is that the ability to choose is one of the, markers of poverty, actually. And we try to build that choice in, but it's really challenging in a shelter environment. But even little things like, instead of serving everybody their dessert, we put the desserts trays out and people can choose if they want chocolate cake or vanilla cake, those kinds of little choices wherever possible. We try to, because just what you said, I mean, the ability to choose is diminished tremendously when as your sort of status is diminished in society. And it's interesting to talk about power. Power is a huge aspect of working within oppressed communities, working in an environment where there's different layers of staff and different responsibilities and different rates of pay. And I read a really interesting study actually that talks.
Hang on to that one. We're going to have to take a short break, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that power and control.
Great.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.